Star Wars Galaxies was the first proper MMORPG set in the incredibly popular franchise of Star Wars. Released all the way back in 2003, Galaxies took the design structure of EverQuest and put a Star Wars theme to it. But see, that's a gross oversimplification of what Galaxies ultimately was. For anyone who played Galaxies during its years, it was more than just a game that tried to mimic EverQuest's success. It was an actual online world with a die-hard community that could go on adventures, trade items, lounge in cantinas, pilot spaceships. It was a game that you could actually roleplay within as if you lived within its virtual world, at least in the game's earlier versions. Galaxies is quite an interesting study in MMO history, as the game underwent quite a lot of structural changes over its lifespan. It had several expansions and updates that were either positively received or controversial. One such update, known as the New Game Enhancements or NGE, essentially stripped Galaxies of its original elements in an effort to streamline the game into a wider audience, but it ultimately alienated its fan base regardless of its actual gameplay improvements. Sadly, whether you are a fan of the original sandbox explorative design or of the game's new game direction after NGE, the game did ultimately shutter its service in 2011. But like a lot of MMOs with passionate communities, Galaxies refused to die, with fans taking up the mantle of hosting their own Star Wars Galaxies projects. In fact, server emulation started as early as 2004, so when the game closed in 2011, the fan server scene only got bigger. Galaxies always intrigued me as an MMORPG when I was growing up, but it was something I never got to experience when it was live. As a completely new player in 2025 in the Galaxies community, it can be a bit confusing trying to even understand where to begin, because much like City of Heroes' fan server scene, there is quite a lot of choices in servers, each one sporting a completely different experience in terms of content, gameplay, and design structure. In this case, Reddit became the best place to find information on these servers, with a comprehensive list showing the multiple servers out there and a small description on what each one offers. Today, we are going to be talking about my experience in Galaxies. Does it live up to the hype I've been reading about all these years? Or is it just a nostalgic retro MMO that hasn't aged well? Let's find out. Like many of the other fan projects we've covered on the channel, Star Wars Galaxies is completely free to play. No cash shop, no subscription, no upfront cost. All you gotta do is find a server you want to give a try, create an account, and start playing. Well, it's not all that easy, actually. The main hurdle is getting the game installed and configured for the server you want to play. Fortunately, each server usually has guides on how to get the game installed and running, so it's really not too difficult. Before you do any of that though, you'll want to pick a server to play in. Like I said at the beginning of the video, it's best to check out Reddit for a full server list of what's available out there. The main two I'll be talking about in this video will be Legends and Restoration. Two very different SWG servers, both in terms of gameplay and overall vision. Let's talk about Restoration first. Star Wars Restoration is a server that seems to approach the game with its original vision in mind, having a more sandbox freeform feel than what the game offered near its shutdown. But it also mixes some of the quality of life updates and changes that the game later introduced, giving a mix of SWG's classic and modern era. Getting in-game character creation is relatively simple. It has a lot of racial choices that you may be familiar with as a fan of Star Wars. The races are all cosmetic and have no impact on gameplay systems, so choose whichever one you want. One thing that's a bit odd though to get used to is depending on what server you are playing on, you may have less or more races to choose from. Customization wise, you have a few different sliders you can use used to augment body, face, and eyes, as well as change hair, skin, and gender. For a game that released in 2003, the character creator is simple, but it does offer quite a bit of customization for its time. Once you are finished creating your character, you play through a quick tutorial that will teach you movements, interacting with objects, and combat. If you are a new player, I highly recommend playing through the tutorial, and luckily if you are a veteran, you can just skip it. After the tutorial, you are shipped off to Tatooine. As you may have noticed from character creation, the tutorial and Tatooine's landscape, Star Wars Galaxies doesn't have the greatest graphics by today's standards. But you have to remember, it released more than 2 decades ago at this point. So for a game that released in 2003, the graphics are actually quite decent. Environments are relatively detailed, but of course, they have lower res textures due to its age. Character models are probably the most interesting to say the least. Animations vary from wildly comedic to just straight broken or janky. Luckily, the game's atmosphere and music are top-notch, especially if you are a Star Wars fan. All the iconic sound effects you can think of are here, like the beeps and boops of droids, laser gunfire, spaceships, and the drawing of a lightsaber. The game also sports the iconic sound style from the movie as you explore its world and engage in combat. It's pretty much everything you will want to experience if you like Star Wars or if you like sci-fi settings in your MMORPGs. Getting back to gameplay after arriving on Tatooine, from here you can begin taking up the introductory quest series that introduces more features that weren't shown in the tutorial, like gathering, crafting, and progression. This is where you'll really start to get an idea of how Star Wars Galaxies works and if it's for you. If you are more familiar with modern MMOs that have gameplay systems that hold your hand, guide you along every step of the way, and have a clear path laid out for you in terms of your journey from beginning to endgame, then Star Wars Galaxies Restoration may not be for you. It's a truly unique experience that admittedly can feel a bit dated nowadays in comparison to other MMOs in the genre, but it does offer a unique experience that I recommend at least giving a try. Playing Star Wars Galaxies, you'll quickly learn that it's less about getting to endgame and more about filling a role within the universe you are presented. What type of person will you be in the world of Star Wars? Will you be a charismatic pistol-wielding smuggler or a hardened trooper? How about an enlightened master of martial arts? Or will you forgo combat altogether and take up the trade routes as a merchant? Hell, you can even lounge in the cantina as an entertainer and buff other players with your entertainment, asking for tips as you dance or play music. As a new player, I recommend sticking to a simple profession that involves combat so you can join other players roaming the planets as you quest and level up. Combat in Star Wars Galaxies Restoration plays like a tab target MMO. When you have an enemy targeted, you can attack them with the skills you have slotted in your hotbar. However, I will say that combat is really slow in the beginning, especially when you only have a few attacks to cycle between. But as you progress through the leveling process, you start to earn more and more abilities, and this is where the beauty of the game's freestyle progression comes to play. Star Wars Galaxies had a number of various professions you could train your character towards becoming. In the beginning, you start with a mix of all types of professions, with slight experience in ranged weapons, close combat, entertainment, trading, and crafting. Any experience earned by doing specific activities can then be spent towards improving those professions. For example, if you want to become better at ranged weaponry, then any enemy you defeat using a gun will grant experience for that weapon type. But it gets even more complex when you start building your character into the role you specifically want. You see, not only are there professions you start with, but there are advanced professions that require more focus on specific experience. It's fun just theory crafting, tweaking what perks to aim for in your build, what profession will you master versus which ones you will only dip your toes into to get specific stats. There is so much flexibility in builds with so many different advanced professions that it's rare to find two individuals with the same exact build type, unless of course you are following online guides. Then there is force sensitivity that requires a lot of effort effort unlocking to become a Jedi or a Sith. The Jedi and Sith professions were an ordeal to unlock back in the day, and it's truly some of the most dynamic content I've ever seen in an MMORPG. Unfortunately, all of that changed when the NGE was introduced later in Galaxy's life cycle. NGE stands for New Game Enhancements. It was an era of Star Wars Galaxies that fundamentally changed how the game's progression worked, essentially overhauling everything players knew about the game. Servers like Restoration that do not use the NGE systems are considered pre-CU or pre-combat upgrade. We'll talk about how NGE plays and feels when we get to Star Wars Galaxies Legends. In terms of other content, Restoration has quests, dungeons, mounts, collectibles, pets, space combat, unique player-created quests, player-owned housing, cosmetics, PvP. Most servers of Star Wars Galaxies has a lot of these features with various differences on loot, combat, or progression. Speaking of servers, let's finally talk about Legends. Legends was the most recommended server to new players, as it seems to be the most populated and the easiest to get into. A major difference in Legends compared to other servers like Restoration is the character creation. Legends has the NGE structure of Galaxies, where the game started to model itself more closely to MMOs like World of Warcraft. This means instead of the free-form character progression that Restoration and other more classic servers have, Legends has a more traditional class choice upon character creation, including the choice of being a Jedi. This was one of the reasons that made NGE so controversial. It removed the freedom of the game's class customization for a more traditional selection of classes. However, it did help streamline the game to new players that may have struggled to understand the old system. Additional differences from other servers may be the addition of the Tansari Station tutorial area. This tutorial is much more helpful in teaching the player almost everything they would need to know about Galaxies before shipping them off to Tatooine, including the major change in combat. Combat in Legends from the beginning starts off much faster and feels a lot more active than in comparison to servers that do not model themselves with the NGE changes. If you play a pre-NGE server like Restoration and then go to Legends, it's fundamentally a different combat system. Legends also allows you to access space missions from the beginning, which really adds variety to gameplay. Overall, Legends feels like a much smoother experience from a brand new player angle to the Star Wars Galaxies community, while a server like Restoration has a more classic vibe to it. Keep in mind, there are even more servers to choose from out there as well, each one having their own rule sets, custom content, and vision in how Star Wars Galaxies should be. And really, that's a blessing and a curse for the Star Wars Galaxies community. It's beneficial that there are so many different servers out there to hop into, with each one catering to those who want experiences that cater to their ideal version of Galaxies. Unfortunately, it also divides the community as a whole. Instead of having one central server with thousands of players, instead the SWG community has 20-ish or so servers, each with a small community of about a few hundred players each. But don't let that deter you from trying Star Wars Galaxies in 2025. If you can get past the game's obvious age, there is a really unique experience here. I'm not even scratching the surface in terms of what Galaxies can offer as an MMORPG, and I'm sure veterans will share their history in the comments down below. Personally, I do wish that the SWG community wasn't so split between the many different servers, but as I stated earlier in the video, Galaxies went through so many changes during its lifetime. Not everyone is going to agree on what is the best way to play it. It's just a bummer that having so many different servers separates the community from each other. Not to mention, it requires research from potential new players to even see where they may have the best experience playing. So for those watching, do you play Star Wars Galaxies? Comment below and let me know. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel to support my content. Follow all my social media in the description below, and I hope to see you all next time.